A distress call went out from the water off a remote Mississippi island. Somewhere in the background noise of that call, an audio engineer says she heard 4 words that changed everything. Nolan's really dead now. Investigators haven't confirmed it. The defense calls it fantasy. But once you hear the theory, you can't unhear it. And that's exactly the problem this case is stuck with. This is the story of Nolan Wells, an 18-year-old college athlete who vanished on a holiday boat trip and washed up dead 2 days later. 1 month later, the case isn't closer to an answer. It's split into 2 competing realities. One where a teenager accidentally drowned, and one where somebody knows exactly what happened and isn't talking. On July 4th, Nolan Wells left the Mississippi mainland with a group of friends, headed for Horn Island, an undeveloped strip of land accessible only by boat. GPS records obtained from the state's Department of Marine Resources placed the group leaving around 10 a.m. and arriving on the island a little after 11. Sometime around 3 p.m., Nolan was seen on the island for the last time. Accounts of what happened next don't match. One friend says he begged Nolan to get back in the boat, more than once, and that Nolan refused, saying he wanted to stay behind and leave with someone else. That someone else was a young woman named Katie McCormick. Here's where the story splits. Katie's sister has publicly said Katie spoke to Nolan briefly and assumed he was leaving with the friends he arrived with, not staying with her. Meanwhile, some of those same friends initially told people they didn't even know who Katie was. Later, it surfaced that members of the group had actually been texting her, asking where Nolan was. That inconsistency, claiming not to know someone you were messaging, is one of the loudest unanswered questions in this entire case. The boat carrying most of the group left the island without Nolan. On the way back to the mainland, it started taking on water. A call went out to a towing service. The boat was eventually towed in. Arriving around 5:44 p.m. Nolan wasn't with them. Around 11 p.m. that night, one of Nolan's friends called his mother, Christine, to tell her Nolan was missing. She reported him missing shortly after. 2 days later, on July 6th, his body was found on the shoreline of Horn Island. That's the version of events nobody really disputes. Everything after this point is where the case turns into a fight over what's real and what isn't. The recovery of Nolan's body was witnessed, at least in part, by a volunteer with a search and rescue organization that had been flying overhead for hours. His described spotting a law enforcement presence gathering near the island's northwest tip, then noticing what turned out to be a body lying face down at the shoreline, matching the description of what Nolan had been wearing that day. It's a small detail, but it matters, because for 2 days, missing and dead were 2 very different words. And this is the moment they stopped being different. Let's talk about the audio, because this is the piece that's dragged the case into national headlines. During the boat's return trip, when it started sinking, someone on board called for a tow. That call was recorded and later released publicly by the Department of Marine Resources. It's a short, chaotic clip, people talking over each other, panic in their voices, a request for help. Weeks later, an independent audio engineer says she pulled that same recording, isolated the channels in her editing software, and ran it through noise processing. Her claim, buried underneath the panic, she can make out someone saying a name, Bart, followed by the words Nolan's really dead now. If that's real, it rewrites the entire case. It would mean someone on that boat knew, in that moment, that Nolan was already dead, hours before his family was ever told he was missing. But here's the problem. Nobody agrees on whether it's real. The engineer stands by her process. She's explained it publicly, how she separated the audio channels, isolated specific frequencies, boosted the gain on the section in question. She says she wasn't trying to find a crime, that she initially wanted this to be an accident like everyone else. She says when she heard what she heard, she didn't believe it either. On the other side, the attorney representing one of Nolan's friends has pushed back hard, arguing that both the enhanced audio and the transcript built from it shouldn't be treated as evidence of anything. He's compared the online speculation to people playing amateur detective with a case that involves real families. And in between those two sides, investigators haven't said a word. Publicly, they haven't confirmed the audio is authentic, haven't confirmed the interpretation is accurate, and haven't confirmed it has anything to do with the actual cause of death. 3 positions on the exact same 9 seconds of audio. Nobody backing down. And it's worth pausing on how this recording even became public in the first place. It wasn't leaked. It wasn't obtained through some back channel. It was released by the state's own Department of Marine Resources as part of the official record, then picked up, downloaded, and reprocessed independently. That's part of what makes the dispute so messy. Everyone is technically working from the same original file. They're just hearing 2 completely different things inside it. One of the friends who was on Horn Island that day, someone who says he considered Nolan his best friend, has spoken publicly about what happened before he even left the island. He says he got into a drunken altercation with someone else in the group that afternoon, was pulled onto a boat by his own family member, and left the island roughly 30 to 45 minutes before Nolan was last seen. He says his final interaction with Nolan was small, a joke about the girl Nolan was talking to, a dap, and the words "I love you, see you later," said half-jokingly under the influence. He says he's grateful now that he said it, because it turned out to be the last thing he ever told him. He's also pushed back publicly on the idea that race played a role in how the friend group is being portrayed. Some coverage has framed Nolan as the only black member of an otherwise white friend group. He disputes that characterization directly, describing the group as mixed and saying the backlash aimed at him, questioning his loyalty because he didn't fit a particular narrative, has been its own kind of painful. Attorney Ben Crump, representing Nolan's family, has publicly pushed the idea that race is part of the story, and has said publicly that someone in that friend group knows more than they've said. He's also criticized the volunteer search organization that recovered Nolan's body for not reaching out to the family directly, though that organization says it did submit a full report of its findings to both the family and investigators. Nolan's mother has publicly disputed early reports that painted her son as heavily intoxicated that day. She said people who spent time with him hours before he disappeared described him as clear-headed, talking about college and his future. Not the sloppy drunk narrative she says took hold almost immediately. Separately, federal prosecutors have filed charges, not connected to Nolan's death itself, but to threats made during the investigation. 3 people in different states are now facing federal charges for allegedly threatening a judge connected to the case, threatening government officials, and threatening witnesses and their families. Whatever happened to Nolan, the fallout around this case has escalated into its own set of crimes. Think about that for a second. A case that authorities originally treated as a probable accidental drowning has now generated federal criminal charges against 3 separate people, in 3 separate states, for threats tied to the investigation itself. That's not normal for a drowning case. That's the kind of temperature you usually see when people believe, rightly or wrongly, that the truth is being hidden from them. An independent autopsy, ordered by the family, came back inconclusive. The cause and manner of death listed as undetermined pending further investigation. The pathologist did note something specific: reddish discoloration in the back of Nolan's brain, in the occipital region. But he also said the bigger unanswered question wasn't what was found, it was what wasn't known. Was Nolan conscious when he entered the water? Was he forced in? Or did he go in on his own? The state's official autopsy has been completed. It has not been released to the public. According to public reporting, it's expected to be presented to a grand jury before anyone outside that room sees it. That detail alone has kept speculation alive, because an autopsy is normally a public record, and this one is being treated like anything but. Nolan's mother has also filed to become the administrator of his estate, a legal step families often take when they want to preserve the option of a future wrongful death lawsuit. Around the same time, a state nursing board opened a professional conduct investigation into her, which Ben Crump has publicly suggested could be retaliation for the family's public push for answers. There's also confusion about which boat Nolan was even supposed to return on. Multiple boats made the trip out to Horn Island that day, not just the one that later took on water. Some accounts suggest Nolan may have intended to catch a ride back on a different boat entirely, one that had nothing to do with the vessel everyone's been focused on. If that's true, the boat at the center of the audio controversy might not be the boat Nolan was ever supposed to be on in the first place, which raises its own uncomfortable question. If the audio is real, why would his name even come up on that boat at all? So where does that leave this case? A month later, no one who was on Horn Island that day has been criminally charged. The audio that could change everything hasn't been verified by anyone with the authority to verify it. The autopsy that could answer the biggest question, accident or something else, is sealed. And 2 friend groups worth of accounts still don't fully agree on the last hour anyone saw Nolan Wells alive. Every side of this story is holding onto a piece that supports their version. The mother wants a homicide investigation and won't stop asking questions until she gets a straight answer. The friends on that boat say they're being tried in public for something they didn't do. An engineer says she heard a confession buried in 9 seconds of static. A lawyer says that's exactly the problem. That 9 seconds of static is now standing in for evidence. Until that sealed autopsy becomes public, or someone with real authority confirms or kills the audio theory, this case stays exactly where it's been for a month, surrounded by people who are certain and short on anything that's actually been proven.